Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we're going to be frying up some summer squash. Now, summer squash is a really simple thing to fry. It doesn't take very long, and it's one of those old-fashioned foods that will really bring back memories. And this is something that if you're looking for something different to add to dinner, maybe something that you haven't had in a long time, or maybe you've never had, this is a really simple recipe. Basically, all you need is squash, some cornmeal, some salt and some pepper, and I like a little sugar in mine, and my granny and my mom and all my aunts, they always put a little sugar in it. If you don't like it, leave it out. But I use a couple of teaspoons for every quarter cup of cornmeal that I use. So all you do is you slice your squash up, and I like mine kind of thin. You do want to cut both ends off of it. And I usually cook about a squash per person. You don't want to make more of this than what you need, because it is best served hot. It doesn't make particularly tasty leftovers. So I just fry up however much we're going to eat at a time. You want to, well, I like mine sliced kind of thin. You could slice yours thicker if you wanted to. Thicker, of course, there would be less breading, and it would be a little healthier because less breading, but you do it however you want. I also like mine thinner because it comes out crisper that way. And what I do is about 2 tablespoons of cornmeal for each squash. I find that that's plenty. And for 2 squash, which is what I have here, you would need a quarter of a cup if you don't want to count out the 4 tablespoons. That's a quarter of a cup of cornmeal right there. And you can use cornmeal mix if that's what you've got, because the baking soda is not going to hurt it any. But for baking powder, I don't generally put any baking powder or anything in this when I'm frying squash. And the salt and the pepper is just to taste. I'd probably use at least a quarter of a teaspoon of salt in this much, but you do however much you like, and you can add other spices if you want to. Now, I've seen people doing all kinds of crazy stuff to squash. You don't have to do that. You do want to mix this up before you put your squash in it. And one of these handy gadgets right here works great, and there's no mess to clean up when you're done. Of course, if you were making a whole lot of squash, you'd want a gallon bag. But people, like I said, they do all kinds of crazy stuff to fried squash. They'll do recipes that have 3, 4, 5 steps where they're dipping it in different things, and you'd have to use half the dishes in your kitchen. Vegetables like squash and okra and stuff like that, they have this, for lack of a better word, a naturally sticky sap. So you don't really need to put it in anything other than what you're coating it in, just your breading. You don't have to make a batter and dip it first. You don't have to dip it in egg or cornmeal or anything like, or egg or buttermilk or anything like that. Now you can do all those steps, but it really is not necessary. You get, because of that sap that's in the squash, you get a really nice batter on them, and they come out really crunchy. Just putting them in a bag and tossing them in cornmeal with a few spices. Now, here's your tip of the day, and I put a little blurb in the Johnny cakes that I made in the last video, that if you let them sit for about 15 minutes, they fry up much prettier, and they're not as crumbly. They don't break apart around the edges. When you're making something like this, you want to let it sit for at least 15 minutes. And it's hard to let stuff sit for 15 minutes when I'm videoing it, because that 15 minutes with the 4 cameras is like 16 gigabytes of data that the computer has to process and sort through in editing. So I really can't do that when I'm filming. But if you let this sit for 15 minutes, all that cornmeal and all the salt and all the pepper and all the sugar is going to stick to it, and it's going to make a really thick breading on it, which is going to make it fry up really nice. So what I did is I've already got some sitting over here waiting on us. Now you also have to have enough oil to fry these in. And I've got about a quarter of an inch of oil in my pan. One squash will fit in a pan. You do want to cook them in a single layer, and I've already got my pan on medium so it's hot. And you can see here what happens to these in 15 minutes. That sap, like I said, for lack of a better word, has come out of the squash, and it's soaked all of my batter, or all of my breading that I had in my bag. And I had the same amount in there as I have in here. So once you let it sit for 15 minutes, very carefully place them in a single layer in your skillet. And you do want to cook these in a single layer, and you'll cook them for 3 or 4 minutes on each side. Summer squash is already really tender, so you're not trying to make it tender or anything like that. You just are trying to crisp it. You can see these three here stuck together, so there's not any breading at all on that side. I'm not going to fry them like that. I'm going to put them in with this and give it another shake. You do want to make sure that you shake it enough to separate them and get some breading in between them. When you're done, that's all the mess you have. You don't have bowls full of batter and dried egg and stuff dripped all over the kitchen. I dripped a little cornmeal, but that'll wipe up pretty easy. And you can toss that away and wash your skillet and you're done cleaning. That's my kind of recipe right there. But anyway, we're just going to let these sit here and cook. And I do have them on medium heat. That's about where you want them, and that's about where you'll keep them the whole time. If you were using an iron skillet, you might have to turn it down just a little bit. These are almost ready to turn. You can see they kind of start to float just a little bit, even if you're cooking them in a skillet. These can also be deep fried if you would like, and they deep fry pretty easy. I just always use a skillet. But when they start to puff up a little bit and float a little bit, they're getting close to being done enough to flip over. Okay, just flip them over kind of easy when you're ready to flip them. These are one of the very few foods that I would eat when I was a kid. I was a super picky eater, and I don't know how in the world I survived, because I was a picky eater in the time when you ate what there was to eat or you went hungry. And people didn't, mothers, aunts, grandmothers, they really didn't have time to cook a separate meal for each picky child. So, like I said, I don't know how in the world I survived, but this was one of the foods that I would eat. And if you have a little kid who's a picky eater, they might like this because it does come out so crispy. And little kids who are picky eaters usually like crispy foods. And if they're super, super picky, you can always add a little more sugar to it. Even though they're getting a little sugar in it, they're not getting as much sugar as they would get like in boxed cereal or something. And they are getting some fresh vegetables. So add another teaspoon of sugar in there and give them to your picky toddler. Let them try them. Little kids also like them because they're small, and they can hold them. So if you've got something that's crispy and small, sometimes you can get those little kids to eat it. These make a good side dish, like I said, with any dinner. I mean, it would literally go with anything, just a little something extra with dinner. They're also good appetizers, or sometimes I'll even make them for a snack because it doesn't make that big of a mess. You're not mixing stuff up in bowl after bowl after bowl after bowl. And you can pick a healthier oil to fry them in, like the grapeseed oil, which I've talked about a lot on here. You could even fry these in coconut oil if you wanted to. I think that would be good on them. So, that's some options. And again, it's something for those picky eaters who are living off potato chips. Okay, my second side is starting to get brown now. And you can just lift them up a little bit and kind of look and see. And if you flip them over and they're not as brown as you want them, you can always flip them over more than once because they're pretty much submerged in the oil. Just be careful not to rip your breading off. And I don't really like to drain these on paper towels because the paper towels can stick to them. If you have a little rack that you can sit them on, that works best. I said you do want to serve them as quick as you possibly can because they're certainly better hot than cold. I wouldn't eat them right out of the pan because they're very, very hot where they've been down in that grease. If you're going to be giving these to a little kid, definitely break them in half or break a couple of them in half and check the center and make sure the center is cooled down because that hot grease can get in there and cause some really bad burns. But you just keep putting them in your frying pan in a single layer until you get them all cooked. And we'll keep repeating that process until they're all done. Okay, you can see there how crispy and how brown these are. They have very hot grease in them right now. They're way too hot to eat this quick out of the pan, but they have a really, really nice crunch. And they will stay hot long enough for you to fry a couple of pans, but that is something you might want to keep in mind. You're only going to be able to get out 3 pans before they start getting to that point where they get too cold and they're not really, really good to eat. But if you're going to cook them for a whole lot of people, you can turn your oven on about 200 degrees, leave them on the rack, stick them in your oven, and that'll keep them warm till you're ready to serve them. Because you really don't want to, like I said, reheat them, and you don't want to serve them cold. So if you want something a little bit different for a snack, maybe something different to serve for an appetizer if you're having a get-together, or you're looking for something special for dinner that you haven't had for a long time or you've never had, give this recipe a try. It is really, really easy and it is really, really good. Like I said, it's one of the few things I would eat as a very picky child. So I really appreciate you joining us in the Hillbilly Kitchen. Don't forget to click like and subscribe before you leave so you don't miss any of our videos. And here in the next week or so, we're going to be uploading some old-fashioned apple butter. I'm going to show you how to make that from start all the way to the canning process. And we've got some really good giveaways coming up. Till next time, remember to put God first.